And joining us now is Scott Waller, President and CEO of the Mississippi Economic Council. Scott, always good to see you, sir.
It's great to see you. Thank you for letting me come on today.
So I know that the MEC has been working with the legislature and others on this legislation that would affect how pharmaceuticals are bought and sold in the state, and more specifically the role of the pharmacy benefit managers, known by the acronym PBM.
Right.
And they sit in what honestly is a very complex, convoluted ecosystem.
Very much so.
I've spent some time long before this meeting with you today trying to wrap my head around that, and I have a hard time finding where everybody's analysis of it is in agreement. That's the first thing, which tells me, would you agree with that?
That's a good point.
And you start looking at visual depictions of the workflow, something I have a little experience with in my business career, and there's a lot of arrows pointing all over the place between the parties. And the poor consumers are out there just at the mercy of all this.
In a lot of ways it is. And you understand this, as you said, probably in your previous life, you had to deal with making sure you had a good benefit program for your employees, whether, and again, I don't know if you were self-insured or if you were using a group policy.
Third-party group policy.
But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is it's all about trying to negotiate the best possible price for prescription drugs for Mississippians who have insurance and the employees of the members that we represent. And this legislation that was introduced has a couple of really what I would call red flags in it that creates problems for us in terms of determining where they're claiming there's going to be cost savings that they say there's going to be. But more importantly, if it truly is cost savings, why has the legislature chosen to not include the state health plan, which covers them, by the way, in this, if there truly are cost savings, which we have done a lot of research, Gerard. We have talked to businesses of all sizes across the state. We've talked to providers in terms of healthcare providers and others, insurance providers and others, and there has been numerous analysis looking at this bill. The companies that are part of MEC that have gone and taken the time to look into this, they didn't just give me a quick answer on, hey, this is going to cost this much based on one thing in the bill. They looked at every aspect of it, and I've yet to have a single one come back and say, oh, we can save money doing this. Everybody's come back and said, this is going to cost me X. And depending on the size of the company, it could be anywhere from $100,000 up to over $1 million or even multiple millions of dollars of additional cost in health care because of prescription prices going up of what this bill requires. And what it does, it requires two things. It requires that there will be an $11.29 dispensing fee put on all prescriptions when they're filled or refilled. And then the pricing model is something called NADAC, and that's where they say they're going to hit their savings. Well, we've done a lot of research on that, too, and there's an actuary out there that looks at the medical stuff in particular called Milliman. And Milliman says, look, yeah, there's going to be some drugs that will cost less under NADAC. But the drug mix use that's there is what makes that determination. And they say NADAC is flawed because it has a very small sample size of pharmacists that actually report in what the drug costs are. And then secondly, not all drugs are reported. So if that's the case, if there's a drug that's not reported, it will go to the system that's currently in place and no adjustments being made for that huge dispensing fee. Today, dispensing fees, as I understand it, range anywhere from 50 cents to a couple of dollars. This would raise it to $11.29 per prescription, and that's a very big jump. And then secondly, there's no real evidence that we've been able to find that NADAC would make up that big difference in that. And quite frankly, there's a lot of drugs that aren't. Well, those would be charged at the prices they're charging today, or possibly even higher, and there's no adjustment for the dispensing fee. So we just think there's a lot of things in this that aren't good. Ultimately, and this is what it boils down to, it's going to come back to hardworking Mississippians that will pay the bill.
Yeah. So I guess I wonder, just thinking about you discussing the dispensing fee, Scott, why is the state involved in that?
Well, and that's what I didn't mention in all of this. The way this process works is There's several elements involved. The companies, particularly those that are self-insured, or the insurers that provide group or individual policies, they negotiate prices on all aspects of health care,
right,
as part of what they do in getting their contract for health care, whether they're self-insured or whether they're using a group, or even if somebody is on their own and needs to buy insurance, they get these options. Those prices are negotiated by people that really understand it a whole lot better than I ever will or will ever claim to. But what I do know is they don't necessarily want the prices to be high, because in a lot of cases companies pay the premiums for their employees, so they're going to look for the best deal possible. And then they also want to make sure that employees that want to put their families on there, that then the employee has to pay that part of it, they're paying as little as possible. Yeah. So under this legislation, all of those things I just talked about that's called negotiating a contract is taken away from the company. This is really overreach by the government to say a business no longer has the ability to negotiate its own private contract on what its benefits will look like for its employees.
And just for background, for purposes of our audience, Scott, and please step in if I describe this incorrectly, but the pharmacy benefit manager, the PBMs, they actually work and sit between the pharmaceutical makers and the insurance companies. Because pharmaceuticals and drugs in general are so complex that it's difficult for the traditional health insurer to tackle that piece. So the PBMs work, and what they really do is they help create what they call formularies, which are just a schedule of drugs that are covered in various categories that have to meet certain minimum requirements in order to offer insurance. But they work directly with pharmaceutical companies, and they work to bring the price down, and they get compensated for that in the form of rebates.
Right.
But all that, and I think what's being argued is that we don't know anything about those rebates. But I thought by law that had to be transmitted. It had to be disclosed.
It is. And that was brought up. They had a hearing about a week ago at the Capitol that talked about a lot of this. And one of the things that was said by the people that are pushing this legislation, they made the statement that They made the statement that businesses don't know what rebates the PBMs are getting, and the two business people that were there who manage benefits for very large companies in this state, both of them stood up and said, "That's not true. We get a report every month on what our rebates are." And all of that rebate is all part of the negotiation. So it's in the contract that says, okay, we've got to tell you what we're getting and how the savings are then passed on to you as the business. So I think there's a lot of things being said about this that really aren't coming to light in a way that help people understand it. But I'll come back to what I said a minute ago. If there really is cost savings by making these changes that's being proposed in this legislation, if there really is cost savings by taking a business's right to negotiate their own private contract, which, again, I view that as government overreach, and there's savings in doing this, why is the state medical plan, the 190,000-member state medical plan, not included? Why is the legislature saying, okay, we're going to pass on the savings here, but we're not going to give it to our own state employees or ourselves? The truth of the matter is, we have heard from business after business after business. We have talked to insurance providers. There is no model that shows that this has a long-term effect of saving money. And that's the reason the state plan is not in there. Because if you put the state plan under the same guise that all of our businesses are looking at, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars more for the state plan. I mean, I've heard upwards of $30 million more for the state plan under this, and this legislation specifically excludes it. Or if they didn't have that provision to exclude them, they would be part of it. So I think there's a couple of things there that make you go, is this really what they say it is?
We got a break right here. When we come back, if you're available, can you stay around?
Yes, I can.
We'll dig into this a little bit more. We've got Scott Waller, President, CEO of the Mississippi Economic Council, in the Element Wealth Studios. Our guest is Scott Waller, President and CEO of the Mississippi Economic Council. Scott, so I know this has been taking a lot of your cycles. Let's put it that way, because it's a very important matter. There's no doubt, and it's something that, gosh, affects virtually every member, if not every member that you guys have, and every business in this state that offers insurance, which is most of them.
And you know, there's been a lot of attention put on self-funded plans,
right?
But small businesses, they don't do that. They depend on the ability to go out and purchase insurance, and that's kind of where that process works. So looking at what the impact of this is on group plans, whether they're large group, small group plans, it's astronomical, and it's going to raise it. We've seen numbers from different insurance companies that provide different types of services, and we're getting the same type of information back. You're looking at probably this, meaning at a minimum, probably 15% increase in premiums alone. And that doesn't take into account the extra cost of copays. You know, inflation is always a part of everything that we do. And then just rising drug costs, as you mentioned before. You know, the process of understanding how drugs are priced is a very complicated process. And as generics come on the model, that onto the scene, that changes things. So all of those things are part of that process as these companies try to determine, okay, if we go in and negotiate what our drug pricing is going to be, then this is how we'll be able to set up our premium. So, but the businesses that do have self-insured plans, they're very concerned about this. And even one that I've talked with that uses primarily the NADAC model that is proposed here, they would see significant increases because they're already there, and they're not excited about this $11.29 dispensing fee because there's no way to make that up from what they're doing right now. So I think there's a lot of things that are out there with this. While, as you said, it's very complicated and somewhat hard to understand at times, which is why, as you know, in my former profession, when I was in journalism, I tried to just get to the facts and ask as many questions as I could to help me understand it. And there are a lot of people that understand this a whole lot better than me that can look at the numbers and really tell us what it's going to be, that have put a lot of time and effort in doing that. And I want to just stress the fact that the companies that have provided information to us, they didn't just do like on the back of a napkin kind of formula. They really looked into what this was going to do based on the plan they currently have and the contracts they currently have. So I think the information they're giving us, they're very, very concerned. They see a lot of possible cost increase. But what's the biggest concern is if a company is working hard to provide really good benefit plans and that cost is going to go up, that is going to be passed down to their employees. So, again, it's the hardworking Mississippians that ultimately will shoulder the cost of this. And we're concerned about it because we want to make sure we have a good business climate, a place where the cost of doing business is reasonable, and this is a concern to us. Yeah.
You seeing anything similar to this in any other state, Scott?
There's been one other state. I actually put an op-ed column out yesterday, and I mentioned this in it. There's one other state that has put a plan very similar to this in place, and they also took out the state health plan when they did it there. And it took them over a year because of issues of getting it implemented, but it started January 1. So we don't have any real data. But on January 30th, which was Monday of this week, my counterpart in West Virginia at the West Virginia Chamber sent out a notice to his members saying, hey, please take this survey on the impact of this because we have gotten – some of our members have said they are already seeing significant increases in pharmacy prices. So that's just in a 30-day time frame that they're hearing from their members saying this is costing me more money. And so – while we don't have any what I would call long-term reliable data at this point, right off the top, we're hearing that this is not working well for businesses in that state.
This just seems really, whether it's raises cost or reduces cost, it seems like it's inappropriate role of government. I mean, just stop it right there.
That is really the very first line of what I sent out yesterday. Says this, it's an egregious overreach of government, and that's exactly what this is. It is government getting in the way of a company being able to negotiate a private contract, and I think that flies against all principles that we stand for, I believe, in terms of allowing a company to be successful. You've got to let them conduct their business in the best way they see in conducting their business.
You know, Scott, no disrespect whatsoever to our lawmakers, but this is a complicated matter that really requires some fairly deep analysis and understanding, I would think, just to even cast a vote. This is a hard deal.
It's a hard deal, and I think part of what has happened is, and I will say this, and again, I don't mean any disrespect to our local pharmacists. We need them. They're a very important part of our economy. We want them to be successful. That's a fact. However, I think as this bill was being written and introduced, there was a really big push to get a lot of senators to sign on to this legislation, and 30 plus did. As they have learned more and more about this, every day more and more are taking their names off this legislation, having their name removed, because they understand this isn't really what they thought it was. And that's part of, as you say, the ability to understand it sometimes it takes time. And that's part of our process. This bill was introduced right off the bat. It was finally dropped on the 17th of January. So, I mean, you know, less than half a month ago. And we've been spending all that time really looking at what this really does, and that's why we're very concerned. It passed out of the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee. It's on the Senate calendar right now. Hopefully they'll realize as they look at this, we encourage them, please don't just take a vote based on emotion. Take a vote based on really what this bill does. And I think they'll see, if they really dig into it, there are still some issues here that we do not need to have this legislation continue past next Thursday.
Yeah.
We need to go ahead, put it to bed, figure out, you know, in the off season, are there other options, and then go from there.
Yeah. Well, we shall see. Has there been any discussion of when this might be put up for a vote?
There has not been. As I was coming in earlier, I was listening to the Senate. They've since adjourned since we've gone on the air. So it will be one day next week, but the deadline is next Thursday for all bills to come off the calendar. So we'll see what happens over the next few days and continue to work and hopefully make people aware of all of the problems here. And as you said, it's taken up a lot of bandwidth for me, and there's a lot of other great things happening. There's some really good workforce legislation out there that's going to continue, you know, that's proposed to continue our career coaches, which I think is a big part of what we've got to do. There's some legislation that's looking into, and this, again, these are things that we don't have all the answers to yet. There's a procedural thing called a reverse repealer that keeps a piece of legislation alive. So it actually is in the pharmacy bill, but in our case, we just believe that bill just needs to go on and go away right now, and let's don't even continue to talk about that piece of legislation. But we've got some legislation looking at how we could possibly restructure our financial aid system to get more non-traditional and part-time students to take part, particularly for workforce training type things. So there's some good things that are going to happen in this legislative session. We just think this one would be a bad one.
Yeah. And I know, given that you have really been focused on this, which it certainly appears you should because this is so sweeping, I've been talking a lot about the vehicle legislation, which would essentially require that all new electric vehicles sold in the state of Mississippi would have to be done so by an independently owned dealer in the state. And I hope you'll take a little time to take a look at that. I think it's bad legislation. I can tell you it's 100% in opposition of on my text line and in talking to the general public out there. I think the only people that have some interest in this are those who own the dealerships in the state and some people in the Capitol. So,
well, we will be taking a look at that and several other things as we go forward. And again, we appreciate the forum you provide for us, Gerard.
Appreciate it, Scott.
It makes a difference.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And thank you for coming on. And we'll be tracking this, and I'm sure we'll talk about it some more.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Scott Waller, President and CEO of the Mississippi Economic Council, has been our guest. We're coming right back.